Tale 6, A Daughter of Proud Kentucky, by Anonymous. In response to a vigorous rap, I was admitted to a scantily furnished but clean apartment, the warmth and glow of which made a pleasant contrast to the drizzling rain, the rows of flickering gas lamps, and the sloppy streets that I had been plodding through for several moments. Leaving my hat and coat in the narrow hall, I followed the directions of the little girl who opened the door, and soon found myself in the parlor which contained furniture that was old, badly matched, and much worn. Pictures, well, two portraits, and a few little cards on which some enterprising merchant had printed his name, all of which failed to add greatly to the attractiveness of the room. My scrutiny was not to be confined to the handiwork of man, however, for by the time I had taken a complete inventory of the room, my attention was attracted to an object of nature. I heard a soft voice say, "Good evening, sir." The full tone and sweet southern accent caused me to turn, and as I did so my mind was filled with anticipation. Before me stood a girlish figure. She might have been 25, although she did not look it. Their 104 was that in the deep gray eyes which told of trouble rather than the joy of youth. Her soft hair was rolled loosely back from the low brow, leaving only a little curl or two above her temples. Her neat-fitting house dress of princess design did little to add a matronly air. Mature youthfulness sweetened by cares is what flashed through my mind as I took the slender white hand which she extended with the dignity of a court lady. "I am I said. "Yes, I have been expecting you," she said, as she pointed to a wobbly rocker, at the same time gliding across the room to a little divan. "And are you ready to proceed?" I asked, in the cold mechanical way that had been supplied by nature and developed by cultivation. "I suppose so, sir, but what am I to tell you first?" "Tell me where you were born and grew up, and so on, right through to the present time." "Well, I was born in Kentucky, and there grew yes, I might say to womanhood, although I was young when I left there. I was an only child. My father was a wealthy stockman, and during my childhood want was an unknown word to me. My earliest recollections were of my old black mammy, who used to croon to me, in a voice that was always soothing. I was taught to believe that the world was at my command, a mother's care I never knew, for my advent into this world cost her her life. Ah, sir, I have often longed for a real mother, one to whom I could go and tell all my little secrets, one who could feel the love for me which my nature seems to crave. My father was a most indulgent parent, but I fear that in his great goodness, he failed to conceive the emotions of a girl's heart. When I was 15, I met a young man from the north. It was quite an accidental meeting, but it was not an accident that I loved him, nor that he worshipped me. He came to our plantation to buy some horses for his stables in Chicago. He was honorable enough to ask my father for my hand in marriage, whereupon my father flew into a rage, told him that his business there was buying horses, and not putting foolish notions into a young girl's head. The scene was a stormy one and closed by the young man being ordered to leave. He left that night and took me with him. We crossed the river into Indiana and tried to get married, but on account of my extreme youthful appearance, we were unable to obtain the license. We traveled on to Cincinnati. Failure again confronted us. Just as we were in the act of boarding a train for Chicago, an officer arrested us. I was taken back to my home, while my lover was placed in jail on the charge of abduction. A taste of the things in the outer world only made the fancies in my childish brain grow. I soon found myself planning how I could leave my father's home and secure freedom for the only man I loved. I begged and pleaded with my father, but to no avail. Finally, he informed me that he would horsewhip me and lock me up if I ever mentioned the matter again. This was too much. All the pride within me bounded to the surface, my hot southern blood tingled, my cheeks flamed in anger. It was then that I missed my mother more than any 106th time in my life. The thought of her put a new idea into my disturbed brain. I would go to the spot where she was laid to rest, there to find relief in the desolation of the grave. It seems as but yesterday that I strolled down the lane, across the meadow, and entered the little enclosure that had been set apart for a final resting place for the members of our little family. The ripened blue grass waved gently at the bidding of the gentle breeze. The full, warm October sun shed its beauteous rays of light upon the great, spreading trees. The birds seemed to be chanting their last song of summer. The red and brown leaves lay scattered on the hillside, making a scene of gorgeous splendor in the bright sunlight. Drooping flowers showed signs of the first frost, chattering squirrels scurrying hither and thither, gathering the winter's store of food, added to the fullness of nature. As I followed the little unused path, keeping before me all the time the tall, white shaft, I seemed to leave the world in which I had been living. The choking sensation gave way, my eyes no longer burned, the great relief I sought seemed granted, and instead of gasping for breath and feeling the hot scalding, tears running down my cheeks, I kneeled down on my mother's grave and gave way to the sobs that came. It seemed to me like great waves of comfort, and felt tears that were cool and refreshing. I remained there for hours, never looking up, and not till a well-known fluttering sound reached my ear did I think of leaving. The noise was made by a flock of blackbirds that had come to seek shelter for the night. As I passed down 107, the sloping hillside, where the long shadows were fast fading into the twilight, the first feeling of loneliness crept over me, but I did not want to leave. I loved the place. It seemed the most sacred place on earth to me. That night, as I rolled and tossed in my bed, I fully realized that I had been wrong. Yes, it was wrong for me to disobey my father, and I had aggravated him until he was cross. It was all my fault that he had threatened me. I had no business to annoy him, and would go now and ask his forgiveness. I stole out of my room feeling like a guilty culprit. I can see myself now as I crept through the long hall of our old southern home, closer and closer to his door, until at last I could hear his deep, heavy breathing. I pushed the door open. Then at the critical moment I became frightened lest I should waken him. Still I was firm in my purpose. There in the darkness of his room I saw the hillside, saw the birds, and heard the soft rustling of the leaves. Oh, how my heart went out to poor Papa. Alone, alone, in the world, with only an ungrateful, disobedient daughter as his nearest of kin. I am sure that the time spent at the grave created a communion of souls. I could almost see my mother as she had been pictured to me, and the vision drew me nearer to Papa. One step more and I was inside the room. Cautiously I crept to the bedside, then quietly kneeling on the carpet, I buried my face in the pillow beside his head. Then for the first time that I could remember I put my arms around his neck and kissed him. His first words brought a flood of tears to my eyes and caused such a lump to rise in my 108th throat that I could not say a word. I knew now that he misunderstood me, for with a muttered curse he commanded me to go back to my room. "But please, Papa, hear me," I begged. "No, I don't want any more foolish nonsense out of you," he said. Nothing could induce him to hear me, and I was compelled to leave without making him understand that it was forgiveness and just a word of love that my young heart yearned for, instead of his permission to see my lover. Back to the loneliness of my own room I went. As I felt my way along the dark hall, I wished that I might die. Ah, if I could only have heard one kind word from him, I would. "Well, I am sure that you would not have had this story for your book, but I suppose," said the girl with a dreamy sigh, "that the foundation of your work is cemented together with the mortar made from mistakes." Yes, I quite agree with you, that if there were no sorrow in this world, this book never would have been written. "Well, back to the story," she said, with a toss of her head, as though she would have it done with. "Yes, go on." I returned to bed, but not to sleep. I tossed about in frantic efforts to forget the burning wound I felt. When daylight came, I arose and dressed myself without calling my maid. My eyes were so red and swollen that I could not go down to breakfast at the usual hour, and when I did go, I asked for my father. "Law sakes alive, honey, you fadda done left to 109 Place Mose in Huarago," said my old black mammy. "Did he leave any word for me?" I asked. "No, Mies Abby, he just went and neva said nothin'." My heart fell within me. I had intended to try again to explain to him my resolutions of the day before. Later in the day, I learned that my father had gone on a 10 days trip. Oh, how desolate I felt, with no one but the colored servants about. I am not surprised now that I was easily persuaded to leave my home, and it came about in this way. On the evening of the day of my father's departure, a man came to our house on business. He was not an entire stranger, for he had been there many times before, although I had seen but little of him. He was a noted horseman from California, and his business, like my lover's, was to purchase horses. He was received into our house, and all the generous hospitality of a Kentucky home was extended to him, and I, being the only member of the family at home, took upon myself the duty of entertaining our guest. He was a man of 50, and his gray hairs added much to his polite dignity. He was a much-traveled man, and his stories of adventure were so thrilling and interesting that he quickly had me wrapped in attention. The evening being warm, we sat on the broad gallery, better known as a veranda in the north, and after asking my permission, he lit a cigar, and as he leisurely puffed and blew out clouds of smoke, he explained to me how he had been all over the world and where he lived. In doing so, he painted such pictures of the beauties of nature that I lost interest in the little world that I had always known. 110, a new desire was created within me, and then a new thought came to me. I wondered if this kind old gentleman had any daughters of his own, and if he had, I wanted to hear about them. That desire was followed with the thought that it would be nice if my father were like him. I finally asked him if he had a daughter, but he seemed reticent as to her. At last, with a struggle born of desperation, I asked him if his daughter loved him and should come to him for advice, would he give it? "Bless your heart, yes, any father would do that," said he. I did not think he could hear me crying softly, and I made no reply for some moments, that my quivering voice might not be the talisman of betrayal. At last I ventured to say, "It would be so nice if such were really the case." At that he said, "Come here, little girl, and tell me what the trouble is." With that great desire to unload my heart, I could not resist. I needed but one invitation. I told him all. When I had finished, he said, "I know your father very, very well, and do not think he will consent, but I will help you." "Oh, you will," I exclaimed. "I knew you would, you are so good, so kind," and I fell upon my knees in front of him. The plans were quickly made. I was to leave the house the next day, go to the railway station, which was but a mile distant, buy a ticket and go to Indianapolis, wait until my benefactor could go to Cincinnati to secure the release of my lover, then they would join 111 me and we would be married. It all carried nicely. After we were married, the question arose as to how to keep out of reach of my father's wrath. That was soon settled by our accepting an invitation to visit our champion in San Francisco. My father made no attempt to follow me so far as I know. We set up housekeeping in the West. My husband was devoted to me, and we could never thank our good Samaritan, as we called him, enough for helping us. As you well know, a southern bud soon bursts into a full-grown flower. Consequently, I was not long in developing into a full-fledged woman, and in spite of my tender years, I felt the full importance that devolved upon me when, after 12 months of wedded life, a baby girl came to brighten our home. My husband had not entered into business of any kind, he having plenty of money, and as he said, cared to do nothing but love his little girl. Happy. I was as happy as an angel, and sometimes think that the memory of those days keeps me alive now. Again, the thought almost crushes me. I shall never forget the first cloud that hovered over my sunlit career of wifehood and motherhood. It was in the evening of one of the days of the great race meet. I was waiting for my husband to come home, sitting in the window as was my custom. It was after nightfall, but many of the pleasure seekers of the day had extended the revelry into twilight sport. Handsome equipages, loaded with gaily dressed women and well-groomed men, rolled by one after another. Some were singing, while some more fortunate carried buglers and other musicians. I had not attended the races, on account 112 of not wishing to leave the baby, but Harry, my husband, had gone. We had been invited by our old friend, and while Harry gently protested that he would not go a step without me, he finally consented, after considerable persuasion on my part. At 9 o'clock in the evening, my weary vigil was rewarded. A four-in hand drawing a hansom tally-ho drew rein in front of our home. I could not see any of the faces, and the first intimation I had of Harry's being in the crowd was a remark someone addressed to him, saying, "It's all dark, Hal, old man, nobody at home, don't get out." Then I heard him say, "Oh yes, I know she is here waiting for me, and I must leave you." Then a jangle of maudlin voices, one saying one thing and one another, but among the many things that were said were, "Good night, sweetheart, and here, kiss me once more before you leave. Be sure and come up tomorrow." I could stand no more. I moved from my position to a point where I could touch the button which turned on the electric lights. Then I heard this. "Hist, sh, be still," and then in the brave and manly tones, I heard him thank his host. The host asked to be remembered to me, and to assure me that he was sorry I could not be with them, etc. Then respectable, cheery good nights were the parting salutes. Harry came into the house and, as was his custom, took me in his arms. I discovered that he had been drinking, but uttered no word of reproach, neither did he offer to explain. Next day after he had gone downtown, I sent a note to our old friend which he answered 113 in person. I begged him not to take Harry on any more escapades. He laughingly answered that a man must see a little of the world. I did not like his manner, and frankly asked him to tell me all about the affair. "There's nothing to tell," said he, "except that, as you know, Harry is a fine fellow and a good entertainer, and I needed him to help to take care of that jolly little party, and I must say that he was a success. Ah yes, Harry is a prime favorite, and you, my little girl, should be proud to know that since he has been so unfortunate as to lose every dollar of his own, that he can yet be of such service to me that I can afford to pay him a princely sum for his good qualities." Lost every dollar? Why, what do you mean, mister? I mean that unfortunate speculation has caused your husband to? Ah, well, never mind, little girl. I did not come here to tell you bad news, but rather to comfort and assist you. Come, come, cheer up, he said, as he laid his hand on my bowed head in a kindly manner. But I implore you to tell all everything. Yes, let the worst be known. It is I who can help him most. I, his wife who has shared his comforts during days of plenty, who must now cling to him in his penniless misery. Oh, come now, don't take it so hard. It is not so bad as that. He can make a very comfortable living for you and the baby. But how? He has no money, no business, no position. Have I not just told you that, as an entertainer, he was valuable? I can use him to good advantage. You see, little girl, I travel much, have many horses, and consequently many followers. During racing season, I sometimes have a full carload of ladies and gentlemen going where I go and backing my horses, and we entertain the hosts who gather at the race tracks. Oh, you are so kind, sir, and we can travel and help you, I said eagerly. Well, yes, or rather Harry can, but you see, little girl, you must not want to go. Why not? Why cannot I go too? I will do all I can to help. I want to go with Harry, and I know he will want me. Yes, all that is true, but you can see, my dear girl, the people we have are, well, at any rate you might not like them. But I will try, I will do all I can to make them like me. Yes, I know, but the truth of the matter is they are not fit for you to associate with. Not fit? Why, what do you mean? Not fit companions for me, and yet my husband is to become your hireling and mingle with them. My blood boiled, my heart seemed to leap to my throat, while my temples throbbed until my head was in a whirl. Oh, but you see that is another matter, said my caller. With your husband going it is simply a business proposition, while with you, to say the least, it would ruin your reputation. And my husband's name, how about that? Is 115 that not to be considered? Am I to sit at home idle and permit my husband to join a party of men and women whose companionship is of such a nature as would ruin a decent woman who happened to be in their company? No, no, mister. If the company is unfit for me, it is not good enough for him. But you must live. Yes, but not on the price of my husband's honor. Oh my, what a fine little lady you are, but come now. Think it over a while and I will see you later. And here, for fear you will need something, take this. And he pushed a roll of bills into my hand, then added, as he saw the look of disgust on my face, "It is all right, I owe it to Harry and you are entitled to it." I took the money and he departed. That night Harry did not come home, though I watched and waited until nearly daylight. When morning came, I sent a note to Mr. asking for Harry. He replied that he would see me later in the day, and if Harry was not home by the time he called, he would tell me where he had gone. Gone? What did all this mean? Oh, the agony of that day. When night came, I was years older, as I then thought the climax of my sorrows was reached. In the evening, our old friend called to inform me that Harry had recently been drinking and gambling, and associating with improper persons, until not only was all his money gone, but his good name as well. In fact, he had incriminated himself by obtaining money by false representations, and had left for parts unknown. But that need not have bothered him, for the man he had defrauded was our old friend himself, and he 116 would not have punished him, for my sake if for no other reason. So he told me by way of explanation. Oh, what was I to do? Left almost destitute and disgraced by my baby's father. Our friend kindly offered to assist me, but how could I accept it? For I knew no way by which I could repay him. Well, finally he left me, after doing all he could to comfort me while I wept, using the kindest words and softest tones. He averred no harm could come to me from any source, and as a parting salute kissed my tear-stained cheek and said, "Rather than have you suffer, little girl, I will personally supply all your wants." The long hours dragged on, until gray streaks of dawn were visible breaking in the east before my weary eyes closed in slumber. I was awakened early by the maid, only to be notified that I had a caller who insisted on seeing me at once. I dressed hurriedly and sallied forth to greet my caller, who proved to be a neighbor lady. She was one of those people who at times suddenly become deeply interested in other people's affairs. She had just run in to tell me that it was something terrible the way I was carrying on. "Just think," she said, "your husband gone and left you, and all because of that old dog who comes here every night. Oh, I am sorry for you, but I want you to know that you are not the first woman who has been deserted by her husband on account of seeing too much of that licentious old cur." I was too dumbfounded to answer her, and only told her that I did not understand. Consequently, did not choose to enter into a lengthy discussion of the matter. 117, I closed the short but stormy interview by asking to be excused and was highly gratified by seeing my early and impertinent caller pass out with her nose high in the air. My time was absorbed during the morning hours trying to determine the cause of her violent abuse of our friend. My mind was relieved about the luncheon hour when I had another caller. This one also a neighbor and a woman of refinement. She came to console me in my trouble, saying, among other things, that it was an event which had been looked for as the inevitable result for many weeks. I was not overjoyed at the particular kind of consolation which she dealt out, but my spirit was subdued to some extent, and my anger of the early morning somewhat mollified. I was curious to know in just what position I was. My second caller soon made me acquainted with facts that surprised me. She told me that the uncouth old lady who had called first was the mother of a poor unfortunate, who had at one time possessed a charming figure and a pretty face. Their former residence had been in the slums of the city. One day our friend saw her and took a fancy to her, induced her to accompany him in a round of debauchery, and while yet under the influence of the drunken infatuation, he had purchased the beautiful home nearby and moved the girl and her mother into it. But the flowers soon faded, and the attraction which the poor young thing had held for him was soon gone. He settled with them in a financial way that afforded the means to maintain the well-located home. The fact that he paid no further attention 118 to them angered the old lady, and she made use of every opportunity to abuse and decry him. That same evening I was favored with another call from the gentleman himself. He had heard nothing from Harry, and could give me no information as to his whereabouts. I asked him for advice, and he suggested that I wait a reasonable time for news from Harry, and if I did not hear from him, he thought it would be well for me to start out to find him. Next day the agent who had charge of the house in which we lived called. "I came," he said, "to collect the rent." "I was not aware that we owed any rent," was my response. "Oh, yes, 2 months. But I was under the impression that my husband leased the premises for a year." "So he did, but did not pay the rent for a year." In my ignorance of city affairs, I never dreamed, but that city homes were rented the same as farms. Then, with a happy thought, I said, "I will pay you. How much is it?" "Well, the fact is, if you want the house it will be $150 per month." "But that is more than we were to pay." "Yes, I know, but I have been compelled to raise the rent." "Why?" Then thinking of the lease I said, "Does not the contract hold good?" "No, you see you have forfeited your rights in the lease by a failure to pay according to the terms stipulated in it." "But why do you ask double?" "I have reasons which I would rather not make known to you." "I suppose it is because my husband is away, and you think you are in a position to take advantage of me," I said warmly. "No, it is not that, but if you insist on knowing, I will tell you." Proceed." "I am sorry, but it is because this is an irreproachable neighborhood, and some of the residents of this locality object to your living here any longer. And as I have many clients in this immediate vicinity, it behooves me to heed their demands." I was almost too wild to speak, but finally found my mind and tongue in a cooperative state long enough to ask him the reason why I was ostracized by the neighbors. "Because you have Mr. Call here, and it is a well-known fact that he was the cause of your husband's leaving you." My head swam, my throat ached as I forced back the sobs which almost choked me. My pride was not to be crushed in this manner, so I went to my room and produced the roll of bills which this man, whose very touch seemed poison to a woman's name, had given me. For the first time I counted the money, just $300. How gladly and proudly I handed it to the agent, never thinking where my next dollar was coming from, and he, crafty man that he was, gave me 2 receipts, one for the 2 months we owed him, at $75 per month, the other 120 for $150 in advance. Within 2 hours after he left the house, I received a notice that my rent had been raised to $300 per month, and in addition he must ask me to give him a secured lease. What to do I did not know. I sat down and wrote to my father. I waited 5 days for the answer which I hoped would contain an enclosure, during which time I remained indoors not speaking to a person except my maid. I fed my soul on the anticipation that I should be able to live down the unearned shame which had fallen upon me. I knew, of course, when Papa understood my position he would be liberal, and that after all, the pitiless neighbors must apologize to me, for I was as good as any of them. The reply came. "Oh, joy of heaven and earth! How I kissed the envelope on which was the well-known chirography of my dear old papa. Then, with trembling hands and joyous exclamations, I tore the end off and nervously pulled out the reply. The sheet on which the answer was written was crumpled and clinched tightly in my hand when I regained consciousness. The maid and the kind old doctor were the only ones with me. The doctor soon left, and I read the answer again. Better get the man who helped you to marry that dog to help you now. That was all, and that was written across the back of the envelope which contained the letter which I had written him. Just at nightfall, the doorbell rang. The maid reported that my old friend had called. But the doctor had left strict orders that I see no one, and she sent him away. In less than an hour, several bottles of the rarest wine 121 that his famous cellar contained were sent to me, along with an armful of most beautiful cut flowers. For 3 weeks I laid in a bed of fever, during which time the only feminine voices that reached my ears were those of the trained nurse and my maid. Each day dainty ices and fresh flowers were sent to me, all by the hand of the man whose acquaintance was a black mark on the white character of any woman. During all those days of tossing in burning delirium, no women in the neighborhood crossed the threshold of my home. I often thought as I rolled and twisted in search of some cool spot in the bed, that if some kind-hearted woman would just come in and touch me or look on me with a feeling of friendship, I would have been ready to take a good cry, then close my eyes to all things earthly. But no, I lived to feel the sting of and be despised by my sex. After I recovered, my old friend called. I was so grateful for all he had done that he really seemed near to me. Then I told him the incident of the lease and my appeal to my father, whereupon he scolded me gently for not having come to him in the first place. Was able to go out, he took me for a drive. His company was all the pleasure I enjoyed. Women whom I had known turned their noses up when I met them on the street. Finally, the time came for the rent to be paid again. I was still weak from my recent illness. We had just started for a drive when the agent called again. I told him at the door that I had not the money with which to pay the enormous sum 122 due for rent, and it ended by his giving me notice to vacate. Next day, a special messenger brought me a signed receipt for a year's rent, together with a brief note from my friend, saying that he had just bought the property and was now the landlord. I could not see then what it all meant, but I know now that I was simply sold to the highest bidder, and the buyer conducted the sale and purchase all on his own account. I shall never forget my seduction. It occurred right there where I had known so many happy hours with Harry, in the same room where I had been accustomed to receive his beautiful caresses, there in the midst of condemning neighbors. Flowers filled the room in wild profusion. We had a dinner. My friend had invited a few gentlemen to spend the evening. The feast of good things was freely washed down with wine. A musician had kept the piano ringing out sweet melodies. Everything appeared bright. Words seemed soft and soothing. Time passed quickly. The callers were gone all too soon. In fact, just as I had begun to fully enjoy the evening, they seemed to fade away almost before I knew they were gone. The lights were lowered, as though being smothered by the perfume that filled the house. Everything looked soft and velvety. The flowers organized themselves into a kaleidoscopic scene, as though they understood that it was time for retirement, and so effectually blended their different hues, as to cause one to feel that sweet repose abided in the air. I was so glad when I reached my bed and realized in a dreamy way that I was being disrobed, and fondled 123 at the same time. At last, with the silken folds of a new gown, that I did not know was in my wardrobe, clinging softly to my excited, trembling form, I reached the point where the curtain must be drawn. When I awoke the next morning, my head throbbed wildly, my eyes smarted, while my hands seemed pale and weak. As I staggered from room to room in search of I don't know what, strange sights met my gaze. A table in a bad state of disorder, chairs misplaced, and flowers whose heads had once been held high in the air were now drooping, while many petals were scattered about the room. An air of desolation hovered in every nook and corner. The atmosphere seemed stifling. The rays of morning sun straggled through the half-open slats of the window shutters. My heart was heavier than ever before. The consolation I sought when I thought of my seducer's kindness, in comparison to my father's cruel treatment, was of small consequence. I tried to blame my father for the loss of that which heretofore I had held so holy and sacred, that even the thought of surrendering it to any man not rightfully possessing it had never entered my innocent mind. I went to the little nursery, and there, in the morning light, my baby was slumbering in perfect peace. No trial, no sorrow, no temptation had as yet come to the pure infantile heart. The following nights for a fortnight were only repetitions of the acts of the night just described. I learned to sleep by day, and as the shades of evening gathered, shutting out the glaring light of the setting sun, I would find myself engaged with my toilet, endeavoring to appear at my best. For my friend took 124 great pains to compliment me on my personal appearance. Consequently, my pride knew no bounds. Every night he spent with me fondling me, as a child does a new toy, and why not? Was I not a new plaything for this man of millions? I had lost interest in my baby, so much so, that I would not see her for days at a time, leaving her to the care of a nurse girl. I had given up hope of ever seeing Harry again, and cared little about him. He had willfully wronged and deserted me. He was a thing of the past to my frivolous mind. If I became blue and depressed, I would have the maid bring me a bottle of wine from the well-stocked cellar. But all this must end. A change such as the frailties of humanity seek is sure to come. I grew tired of the solitude that I had to contend with. I was a prisoner. One day I told my friend that I wanted to travel some. "All right," said he. "I am going to Chicago. I start in 2 days. Get ready and make the trip with me." I was wild, and in my delight, I threw my arms around his neck and thanked him. It was agreed that we should spend one more night in the house, where we had known so many pleasures before departing. That night of all nights, we had a sumptuous dinner, wine, cordials, everything that two happy, healthy people could indulge in. It was on that occasion that I fully concluded that I could not live without him, and discovered that things which I had hitherto loathed and despised, I now looked upon as a part of my daily existence. The city was reached in due time. The first day here was given to rest, then a round of sightseeing 125 which fairly dazzled me. I had never given much thought as to the immensity of Chicago, and it is little wonder that my unsophisticated mind was overcrowded with the many things that were on every hand for it to feed upon. It was after 10 days of revelry, during which time we went to every place of entertainment, both high and low, that this city contains, that my mind for the first time reverted to my baby, and then to Harry. Not that I cared for him still, but I was seized with a fit of curiosity. About this time, horse racing began here at Washington Park Track, and as my friend and admirer was in that business, I, too, became very enthusiastic in the sport. Every day I could be seen in a box, the most lavishly gowned woman at the ringside. I had money and tips, and being full of the blood that tingles with feverish excitement when anything is at stake, I quickly and easily became the best-known woman among the talent which frequents the race course. I wagered and won, and lost with the same confiding nonchalance. I cared nothing for the money, for I knew not the value, but I was filled with the true desire to be able to pick the winner. At last the season ended, but not until a certain influential and wealthy man of the city managed to fall desperately in love with me. And as he was young, handsome, and clever, I must admit that the fickle goddess who waves the magic wand over such affairs succeeded in convincing me that my California friend had faded some. The glamour seemed to have receded, but honesty and gratitude had not yet been completely eliminated from my sinful soul, and it was with real tears and sobs that I 126 told him that I had learned to love the younger man. His reply only verified statements which I had heard made in regard to him, being that he was always cool, even at the betting stand. He would lose or win a fortune without a change of countenance. But his reply, "Oh, yes," he simply said, "all right, the season is ended, I am through with you anyway." Then taking my hand in his, he said goodbye and departed. Then began the new life. Oh, how easy the second step. Rather than dread it, I looked forward to the completing of the arrangements with pleasure. My new suitor knew my past history, except that I had a child. We took elegant apartments, and he spent the greater portion of his time with me. We were very congenial companions. For months this life continued. At last the existence became monotonous to me. I began to long for something, I knew not what. I often found myself thinking of my past life, my childhood home and my child, the memory of whom I had allowed to go almost entirely out of my mind. One day Mr. Eddy came to see me and found me weeping. He questioned me, and then I told him of my baby, and God bless him. He insisted on my sending for her, which I 999. He arranged it all for the nurse to come to me, and in 7 days my little girl was in my arms. I then became possessed of a new feeling, such, I think, as only a mother can experience. I felt as if I must change my mode of living, but how? To go to my father meant to be turned away, and the burden was double when the care of a baby and earning a living were both to be considered. Again, I put the matter before my friend. 127, he was kindness itself, and proposed to marry me and be the father that my child needed. I gladly accepted his offer, but before we could be legally married, it was necessary for me to obtain a divorce from Harry. We took the first steps in that direction, one of which was to advertise as the law specified, and lo and behold, The advertisement had an unlooked-for effect. It brought Harry from his long silence. He found me, and we talked the matter over with my husband-to-be. It was at this meeting that I learned the cause of Harry's action. He told us as follows. Our old California friend had induced him to bet his every cent on certain races on the day he came home with the crowd, and he had lost all. Then, in order to retrieve his losses, he was advised to become a forger in order to get more money with which to again play the races. It was the same old story. He lost. Then, for fear of punishment, he left the country. I then told him all. Oh, how sorry I felt for poor Harry. After exchanging ideas, we became convinced that it was all a plot of the kind old man in California to get me in his clutches. After we were assured of that, Harry asked me to promise not to go further with divorce proceedings until he saw me again. I promised him. I also promised him not to receive a penny from the man who now wanted to marry me, and as I could not live as I had been, with my child under the same roof, we left. I sold my handsome gowns and jewelry, furnished this poor little home and baby, and I have lived here since. But Harry, where is he? In the state's prison of California. He was caught at last and punished for forgery. No, when he left me, he went to California and killed my traducer. He is serving a term of 10 years for manslaughter, and I am waiting for him.